I'm sorry, ma'am. The receptionist's voice was a whisper, but it sounded like a gunshot in the silent marble lobby. Your name isn't here. The bride left specific instructions. No entry for Haley. The receptionist wouldn't even look me in the eye. She just stared at the guest list like it was a shield. I didn't argue. I pulled out my phone and dialed my sister. You really thought I'd let you ruin my aesthetic? Morgan didn't even say hello. She just laughed, a sharp, cruel sound over the noise of champagne corks popping in the background. You're the help, Haley. Staff entrance is around back if you want to steam my train. But don't let my VIP guests see you. It's embarrassing enough as it is. She hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just reached into my bag and pulled out a heavy, platinum box tied with a silver ribbon. I walked over to the gift table and set it down right in the center. Make sure she opens this first, I told the receptionist. Then I turned around and walked away from the $300,000 wedding I had spent 6 months designing for free. Before I tell you exactly what legal grenade was ticking inside that platinum box, take a second to drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to see how far this story travels. As I drove down the winding cliffside road, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of the last 6 months. My family thinks I'm a drifter, a 28-year-old failure who scrapes by on odd jobs and projects. They don't know my name is on the deed to the building they are currently dancing in. They don't know that H.M. Holdings, the corporation that acquired the Gilded Cliff 3 years ago, stands for Haley Marie. It started the day Morgan got engaged. She didn't ask me to be a bridesmaid. She asked me to be a worker. You're not doing anything important, she'd said, tossing a heavy bridal magazine onto my lap during Sunday brunch. The least you can do is handle the logistics. Consider it your contribution since we all know you can't afford a real gift. So I did. For 6 months, I worked 18-hour days. I wasn't just planning a party. I was constructing a masterpiece. I designed the floating floral installations that Morgan claimed were her idea. I curated the menu, sourcing ingredients from local farms that usually have a 2-year waiting list. I negotiated with the top vendors and Newport vendors, who only took the job because they knew who was really asking. It was almost funny, listening to Morgan brag to her friends about how she talked down the venue fee. She didn't talk anyone down. I approved the discount. I signed off on the waivers. I literally subsidized my own humiliation to the tune of $250,000. I gave her the dream wedding she couldn't afford, simply because she was my sister. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that made them see me. And my parents? They watched me run myself into the ground and called it character building. I remember one dinner, about 2 months into the planning. I was exhausted, my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets and seating charts. My father, Robert, looked at me over his wine glass and sneered. It's good to see you finally making yourself useful, Haley. Maybe if you work hard enough on this, you'll actually learn a transferable skill. God knows you need one. My mother, Susan, chimed in without missing a beat. At least she's keeping busy, Bob. It keeps her out of trouble. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my drink in his face. I just smiled and took another bite of my salad. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that every contract Morgan signed, every vendor she booked, and every deposit she saved was building a paper trail. They thought they were getting free labor from a desperate, unemployed daughter. In reality, they were handing me the weapon that would eventually end them. I built that wedding. I built the stage, I set the lights, and I wrote the script. They just didn't realize that the final act wasn't going to be a toast. It was going to be an eviction. It wasn't hate. I realized that somewhere between finalizing the seating chart and securing the imported orchids, hate requires passion. Hate requires acknowledging that the other person has a soul to be despised. My family didn't hate me. They just used me. There's a concept in sociology called objectification, but I prefer to call it the toaster theory. To my parents and Morgan, I wasn't a human being with feelings or needs. I was a toaster. You don't hate your toaster. You don't love your toaster, either. You expect it to work when you push the lever down. You expect it to make your toast, and when it's done, you leave it on the counter and go eat in the dining room. You don't invite the toaster to the wedding. You don't ask the toaster how its day was. And if the toaster suddenly started asking for respect, you'd just look at it, confused, and wonder why it was broken. That realization didn't break me. It liberated me. Because appliances don't have loyalty. Appliances can be unplugged. Grandma Ruth was the only one who realized I wasn't a machine. 2 months before she passed, she summoned me to her room at the care facility. My parents and Morgan rarely visited hospice centers are depressing, they said. And Morgan didn't like the smell, but I went every Tuesday. They think I'm leaving it all to her, Ruth said, her voice thin but her eyes sharp as glass. She gestured to the heavy velvet box on her nightstand. the famous Ruth Legacy collection. Diamonds, sapphires, antique platinum, $5.2 million of wearable history. Morgan has already picked out which necklace she's wearing to her wedding. She talks about it like it's hers. She loves that necklace, I said, adjusting her pillows. She loves the status, Haley. She loves the reflection in the mirror. Ruth grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. She doesn't see you. Neither do your parents. They think you're weak because you're quiet. They don't know that you're the one holding the roof up while they admire the chandelier. She pulled a thick envelope from under her blanket. I've made a change to the trust. The lawyers call it a condition precedent. I call it a character test. I opened the document. It was complex legalese, but the summary was brutal in its simplicity. The entire estate, the money, the property, the jewelry was placed in a revocable trust. I was named the sole trustee, but the kicker was the distribution clause. The beneficiary shall receive the assets only upon successful completion of the wedding day condition. The beneficiary must demonstrate familial respect and inclusion toward the trustee. Any act of public humiliation, exclusion, or verbal abuse on the day of the ceremony will constitute a failure of the condition. If she treats you like a sister, Ruth whispered, she gets the fortune. If she treats you like a servant, if she humiliates you one last time, the trust dissolves, and the assets transfer to you. Immediately, I stared at her. You're setting her up. I'm giving her a choice, Ruth corrected. I'm giving her one chance to prove she's a decent human being. If she fails, I'm not leaving my legacy to a bully. She died 3 weeks later. Morgan cried beautifully at the funeral, wearing waterproof mascara and checking her reflection in the limo window. She thought she was crying for a grandmother. She didn't know she was auditioning for an inheritance she had already started to lose. I took the job. I planned the wedding. I became the toaster one last time. I wanted to give her every possible chance to pass the test. I wanted to be wrong about her, but as the big day approached, the insults didn't stop. They escalated. And the heavy platinum box I packed that morning wasn't a gift. It was the gavel. 30 minutes before the ceremony, I sat in my rental car at the bottom of the service road, watching the valet park Bentleys and Porsches. My phone felt heavy in my hand. This was it. The point of no return. Grandma Ruth's trust was specific. It wasn't enough for Morgan to be mean in the past. She had to be cruel today. The condition precedent required a contemporaneous demonstration of familial estrangement. I needed proof that, even on her wedding day, even when given a clear choice, she would choose to degrade me. I typed out the message carefully. I didn't want to leave any room for misinterpretation. Morgan, I'm at the gate. Please confirm. Do you want me to come to the front as your sister? Or do you want me to use the staff entrance? This is your last chance to have family at your wedding. I hit send. I watched the timestamp. 1:32 in the afternoon. Inside the mansion, I knew exactly what was happening. Morgan was in the bridal suite, sipping the vintage champagne I had paid for, surrounded by bridesmaids who secretly hated her. She would see my name pop up on her screen. She would have a choice. She could say, "Come in." She could say, "Sorry, I'm stressed, just come to the front." She could say anything human. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a photo. I opened it. It was a selfie. Morgan, looking radiant in her lace veil, sticking her middle finger directly at the camera lens. Her face was twisted into a mock pout, ugly and triumphant. The text message followed a second later. Know your place, trash. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. And don't you dare show your face to my guests. I took a screenshot. Then I backed it up to the cloud. Then I emailed it to the trust's attorney, who was on standby. Confirmed, I whispered to the empty car. Condition failed. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel the old, familiar ache of rejection. Instead, I felt the cool, mechanical click of a lock sliding into place. The sister, part of me, the part that had spent 28 years begging for crumbs, quietly packed up and left the building. All that remained was the CEO. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim car interior. I navigated to the back end of the venue's management system. I didn't need to hack anything. I owned the servers. I logged in as root admin. There it was. The eviction protocol. I had written it 3 weeks ago, a digital kill switch designed for this exact moment. It was a batch command that would simultaneously notify the on-site security team, my employees disable the venue's aesthetic lighting grid, and unlock the digital smart locks on the main gates to allow law enforcement entry if needed. My finger hovered over the execute key. I thought about the years of hand-me-downs, the way they looked through me at dinner, the toaster theory, the fact that my father was currently inside, probably shaking hands with the senator, taking credit for the venue I bought. Morgan wanted to be the center of attention. She wanted a wedding no one would ever forget. I pressed enter. On the screen, a green status bar flashed. Command sent. System. Override active. I closed the laptop. It was done. The timer was ticking. I put the car in drive and headed up the hill. Not to the staff entrance, but to the front gate. I wasn't going to fix her train. I was going to collect my property. The ballroom was a masterpiece of my own making. I slipped in through the main doors just as the applause died down. I stood in the back, half hidden by a towering arrangement of white hydrangeas I had personally selected 3 months ago. The room smelled of expensive perfume and success. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 400 guests who had no idea they were sitting in a courtroom, not a celebration. At the head table, raised on a dais like royalty, sat my family. My father, Robert, was holding a microphone, his face flushed with wine and pride. "To my daughter, Morgan," he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "The jewel of our family, you shine brighter than anyone I know." The crowd murmured their agreement. Morgan beamed, touching the diamond necklace at her throat, Grandma Ruth's necklace. The stones caught the light, sending fractures of brilliance across the room. $5 million of stolen glass, resting on the neck of a woman who had just flipped me off via text. "And to William," my father continued, clapping the groom on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family, we take care of our own." I almost laughed. It would have been a cold, ugly sound. A server, one of my best staff members, a girl named Sarah who knew exactly what was happening, approached the head table. She carried the heavy platinum box in her hands like it was a crown. She waited for my father to sit down, then placed the box directly in front of Morgan. "Compliments of the owner," Sarah said clearly. Her voice carried in the sudden lull of the room. Morgan looked down, confused but intrigued. She loved gifts. She loved being the center of attention. She probably thought the venue owner, some faceless corporate entity she assumed I had charmed, was sending her a bottle of vintage champagne or a comped honeymoon suite. "Oh, look," Morgan said, her voice amplified by the table mic she hadn't turned off. "The venue sent a tribute. Isn't that sweet?" She reached for the silver ribbon. The ballroom fell silent as Morgan opened the gift box. Inside was no champagne, only legal documents stamped by a notary. She pulled out the first, the LLC operating agreement naming me, Haley Marie, as the sole owner of HM Holdings, and the Gilded Cliff. Her confusion turned to dread when she grabbed the next file. The Ruth Family Trust inventory, including the necklace she wore, listed as withheld property with a demand for immediate seizure. The final page was the text she'd sent me, "Know your place." Trash stapled to a notice voiding the trust and authorizing her eviction. The color drained from her face. 400 guests watched as she realized the wedding was over before it began. My venue manager announced the event's termination under a zero-abuse policy. Red emergency lights washed the room as I walked out, but Morgan and my father blocked my car outside. Barefoot and hysterical, she pounded the hood and screamed that the house, the necklace, and my life belonged to her. When I refused to unlock the door, she tried to smash my window with a rock. Security and police intervened, tackling her as she kicked and screamed while my father pretended innocence. I drove away as they handcuffed the bride. The next morning, I woke in my own condo, calm and alone. The attorney confirmed the trust was dissolved. The assets were legally mine, and my parents were barred from contact. Morgan spent her wedding night in jail and now faced multiple charges. I deleted every file I'd created to build her fantasy wedding, 6 months of unpaid work without hesitation. I didn't feel victorious, only free. Some bridges are meant to burn. If you've ever had to become the villain in someone else's life to save your own, you're not alone.